Hello, fourth period environmental science people. Today, your assignment was a sheet about finding gold in a Costa Rican cloud forest. It was a continuation of an earlier discussion about the golden toad and its discovery and subsequent disappearance from a high altitude forest in Costa Rica. You didn't do a very good job. I'm sitting here this evening grading, and it seems like a few of you read the material, understood it, and did a good job answering the questions. However, a lot of you got confused and frustrated, and then some of you got confused and frustrated and then copied off other people who were confused and frustrated, and that was just a mess. And so I decided, you know what, maybe we need to talk about this in more detail. So I'm going to read the passages to you. We're going to talk about them a little bit on this video, and I'm going to give you an opportunity to answer the questions again on Edpuzzle and replace your scores with what you get from this discussion today. So we began the chapter talking about this golden toad, this amazing little cool creature that was discovered in Costa Rica in an area where there were like hundreds of them, even in a square meter, during mating season, and how cool they were. And the scientist went to study them. But then a couple of years later, when she went back, she found that there were a lot fewer of them. And then the following year, there were like none. So the chapter began with this discussion, and then throughout the chapter we've had references to the golden toad, and now that we're finishing the chapter, we're finishing up by talking about the environmental conditions that may have led to its disappearance. So the first paragraph of this sheet that you worked on today says this: what can cause a thriving population of animals to disappear in the span of 1 or 2 years? In the case of the golden toad of Monteverde in Costa Rica, thousands of toads were initially observed during the mating season each year. Did you hear that? Thousands of toads were initially observed during the mating season. But then one year, there were only a few toads, and 2 years later, there was one toad, and then the toads disappeared completely. Going on, the second paragraph says, how the golden toads could disappear so quickly is puzzling, but the case is even more mysterious because the habitat of the golden toads was within a large nature preserve. Often, animal populations are devastated as humans or natural disasters destroy their habitats, but this was not the case in the protected Monteverde Cloud Forest Reserve. So when we talked about this at the beginning of the chapter, we realized that when the Costa Rican government found out that these cool little toads were living in this area up high in the mountains, they set it aside. They said, okay, this is now government property. Nobody can cut down these trees. Nobody can build houses here. Nobody can do disruptive things to this forest because these cool little toads live here and we want to protect them. Although the toad's environment was not being visibly destroyed, it was changing in subtle ways. For instance, when scientists gathered data on the toad's environment, they noticed a significant increase in the number of, quote, dry days, quote. A dry day is designated as a run of 5 or more days without measurable rain. These dry days resulted in a decrease of available moisture. So we're not talking about 1 day without rain here. They're calling a dry day something that's 5 days or more without moisture. So as you know, if it rains 1 day, it can still be kind of damp out the next day. But 5 days without rain means that it's not very wet out at all. So they're saying that there were lots and lots more periods of 5 days at a time when it didn't rain at all in the forest. And as you know, when it doesn't rain for multiple days, things dry up, water evaporates out of little puddles and off of grass and stuff. So it's very, very dry. Moving on, because toads and other amphibians reproduce and live parts of their lives in water, the amount of moisture in the environment affects them to a greater degree than it affects many other species. Of the 50 species of frogs and toads in the study area, 20, including the golden toad, disappeared during this time frame. So what would we think if only one type of animal disappeared? We might think, oh, well, maybe something's eating it, something's eating more of it than usual, or maybe people are hunting it, or maybe there's some other weird thing going on that has to do with just this specific thing. But if lots of different animals are declining and going extinct at the same time, then we have to think, well, what's going on here? It must be an environmental factor, right? Maybe their food is going away, or maybe it's too hot, or maybe it's too cold. There has to be something going on in the environment that would cause multiple kinds of animals to decline and disappear at the same time, right? So it has to be some sort of environmental factor. Moving on, the lifting cloud base hypothesis has been proposed to explain this widespread amphibian loss in the cloud forest. According to the hypothesis, as the number of dry days increased, the base of the clouds that hung over an area rose in altitude. This caused a decrease in the moisture provided by mist in the forests. As this misty cloud atmosphere rose and was lost, the environment suffered as plants and animals died off due to the drier climate. This series of events can occur repeatedly. So this hypothesis says that if it's dry, if it's not raining as much, then there's not low-lying clouds. Well, what are low-lying clouds? Fog. Like, we know what these are, right? We don't have to live in Costa Rica to know what fog is. Fog is like a cloud that's on the ground, and when we walk through it, when we drive through it, like we have to turn our wipers on, right? It's like mist, and so that's what we're talking about in the Costa Rican cloud forest. Is it used to be misty a lot of the time, and as the climate changed, it dried up, and so it was not very misty. So all that, those drippy little puddles and the moisture on the grass and the plants would have dried up for part of the time, at least, because it wasn't raining as much. So one of the questions, let's stop right here to talk about the fifth question on your sheet today, which was which animals would have been least affected by this decrease in moisture. This is an interesting question because is it least affected, or just it would take longer for them to be affected? So I think it makes sense to everybody that if it's not foggy, if it's not rainy and drippy and wet out, then animals that require those puddles and areas of moisture to breed and to lay eggs and to have tadpoles, right, would have a really hard time surviving. But it might be harder to picture, well, what about birds, or what about, I don't know, bears, or some kind of big cat in the, wildcats or bobcats or something like that, mountain lions. I'm actually not sure what kind of big predator lives in that area, but we're going to say mountain lions just for the sake of something big to talk about. So the toads, it makes sense that the toads would not be able to survive because there's no moisture, right? Or not as much moisture. So those populations would decline and maybe even die off, like in this case. But what about, say, birds that eat the toads or the frogs? Well, if there aren't any toads, then eventually the birds are going to have problems, right? Because there's no snacks. And so the bird population might decrease. Even if it didn't die off, the environment wouldn't support as many birds, right? Because there are fewer snacks. But then what about, say, mountain lions that eat the birds? Well, eventually this problem is going to affect the mountain lion population also, right? Because if there are no toads, then the birds, there can't be as many birds. And then if there aren't as many birds, well, then do we see a decrease in the mountain lion population also? Yeah, probably. So even though the toads and frogs and species like that, the amphibians, might have been the first to have problems because of this changing climate, the larger predatory animals eventually have problems too, right? Because the whole ecosystem is connected together. So let's move on to the last paragraph. It's long, so bear with me. Let's read it together. Many scientists link such series of events to global warming. Others state that the rising cloud base could be caused by deforestation and other human activities. New information also points to another possible scenario that may have killed off the toad. The years following 1986 and 87, that's when this study was first done, were exceptionally dry due to changes in atmospheric and oceanic patterns related to a phenomenon known as El Nino. It doesn't talk a lot about El Nino in the paragraph, but it's a weather pattern that causes that part of Central America to be extra dry. The exceptional climate conditions during that period would have contributed to the growth and spread of a deadly pathogen, the chytrid fungus, to which the toad was susceptible. The chytrid fungus grows rapidly in warm, dry climates. The fungus has caused declines in amphibians throughout Costa Rica and may have wiped out the golden toad as the weather in the region became warmer and drier. Scientists warn that although amphibians in this ecosystem are the first organisms to disappear when environmental conditions change, other species of organisms and plants may follow. So let's talk about question number 6 on today's assignment, because question number 6 talks about sequence. It asks you to describe the sequence of events that might have caused something like the golden toad to be extinct. So let's just line these events up in order. So first, climate is changing, right? And it seems that the climate in the Costa Rican cloud forest is becoming drier. So a drier climate means that there are fewer places for animals like toads and frogs to lay their eggs and have babies. And if there are fewer places that are wet for animals to reproduce, then there are going to be fewer adults, right? And if there are fewer adults, then there will be fewer eggs laid and fewer baby toads. And then there are going to be even fewer adults. And then that's going to cause, well, we see how that's going. But then we add in to our sequence of events the fact that the drier conditions caused this fungus to grow. And the fungus would have killed off even the few toads that got to be adults. And so between there not being as many baby toads and the adult toads being killed by this fungus, we can see that eventually the population of toads decreased and then died completely. So now there are no golden toads anywhere in the world. They're all gone. I think that has covered the 6 questions that your assignment asked today, and maybe a couple of extras. I hope that talking about it in this video helped you understand what was going on with the toads and the cloud forest and your assignment for today. I'm going to enter your grades for today's assignment, but when you do better in answering the questions from this video, I'll be sure and replace those crummy grades with a better grade. So I hope you guys have a good evening. I'm going to go ahead and post this, ask some questions, and grade 5th and 6th periods work. And I will see you tomorrow. Take care. Bye.